Deep down in the ocean, there's a hidden process that's literally turning waste into life. It's an amazing story about microscopic helpers and some really unlikely partnerships, and it's absolutely crucial for the health of our entire planet. So, let's dive in and uncover how this all works.
When you picture the ocean, you probably think of this huge, wide-open space, right? But what if its most critical functions aren't happening out in the open water at all? What if it's all going down inside the very creatures that call the ocean home? To really get why that idea is such a game changer, we first need to talk about a huge problem the ocean deals with every single day.
All right, first up, the ocean's nitrogen problem. See, to get this whole story, you first have to grasp this one huge challenge the ocean is always facing, and that's what to do with all its waste, specifically nitrogen waste.
Okay, so picture the ocean like a giant sprawling city. You've got billions of residents, right? And just like any city, they all produce waste. A huge part of that waste is a chemical called ammonia. And here's the thing, too much ammonia is actually toxic. So the ocean needs its own sanitation department, a recycling system to handle all of it. And that system, that's the marine nitrogen cycle. It's basically how the ocean keeps itself clean, turning this nasty stuff back into valuable nutrients.
And right at the heart of this whole recycling operation is one absolutely critical process: ammonia oxidation. I mean, this is the first and most important step. It's all about taking that toxic ammonia and turning it into something safer. You could say it's the linchpin holding the entire cycle together.
So who's actually doing all this heavy lifting? Well, let's meet the ocean's tiny sanitation crew.
For decades, scientists were pretty sure they had this all figured out. They thought this massive job was being done exclusively by these tiny little microbes just kind of floating around in the plankton. And, it made perfect sense. These things are everywhere in the water, just constantly at work.
So how does it actually work? Well, it's kind of like a tiny little waste-to-energy plant. The microbe sucks in the ammonia waste. Then it does a bit of chemistry, converting it into something called nitrite. And boom, that chemical reaction releases a little burst of energy. And that energy is what the microbe uses to live and grow.
Yeah, and this quote here from the Annual Review of Marine Science really nails it. See that term autotrophic growth? That's just a fancy way of saying these microbes make their own food. They don't have to go hunt for a meal. They literally live on the energy they create just by processing waste. How cool is that for a survival strategy?
But this is where the whole story gets a massive plot twist. Because it turns out that our whole idea of these microbes being these lonely little drifters was just not the full picture. Not even close. They were hiding a huge secret.
Yep, it turns out these ammonia-oxidizing microbes weren't just floating around freely in the water. They had another home, a secret life that we're really only just starting to piece together.
And where is that home? They're living inside other animals. I mean, we're talking sponges, corals, jellyfish, even things like clams and crabs. These incredibly important microbes are literally living inside the bodies of all sorts of marine life.
There is a word for this, of course: symbiosis. And this isn't just a quick visit. We're talking about a super close, long-term partnership. The microbe basically moves in and becomes a permanent resident, a symbiont, living side by side with its host. So, you gotta ask why? Why team up like this? Well, as it turns out, it's maybe one of the best roommate situations in the entire ocean. It's a win-win.
So let's break down this deal. For the microbe, what does it get? Well, it gets a safe place to live, sheltered from the dangers of the open ocean. Plus, it gets a constant, reliable food source delivered right to its doorstep, which is the host's own ammonia waste. And what does the host get? It gets an amazing live-in janitor that cleans up its toxic waste 24/7. And there might be another perk. The microbes can also produce nutrients through something called carbon fixation, which is kind of like a little thank you meal for the host.
And this is the really big takeaway here. This partnership completely changes the game. These animals basically become walking, swimming bioreactors. They carry their little cleanup crews with them wherever they go. And that means this super important process, ammonia oxidation, can happen in all sorts of places it couldn't before, like deep inside a coral reef or way down on the seafloor, where you might not find a lot of those free-floating microbes.
So, on to our last section, unlocking future secrets. Because as you can imagine, a discovery this big doesn't just answer questions, it opens up a whole bunch of new ones.
We are truly at a new frontier in marine science with this. There is just so much we still don't know. We've really only just scratched the surface, and scientists are now scrambling to figure out the answers to some really fascinating questions.
Like, for example, why are the rates of this process so different between animals? Scientists have found that you can have two sponges, right, very closely related, and one is an absolute powerhouse of ammonia oxidation, while the other is kind of lazy. What's up with that? We have no idea what's controlling how well these little internal recycling plants work.
And then there's that food bonus we talked about. Okay, we know the microbes are cooking up some nutrients, but how much is the host actually getting? Is it just a little snack every now and then, or is it a huge part of their diet? Quantifying that is a really big deal for researchers right now.
And all of this really leads to one final big question. I mean, if a process this critical, this fundamental to the health of the entire ocean was hiding in plain sight, inside sponges and corals all this time, it just makes you wonder, right? What other secret partnerships, what other hidden worlds are still out there, waiting for us to discover them? The ocean, it seems, is still full of secrets.